We're continuing our series today on a tribe called Baptist, what it means to be a Baptist, and we're actually up to the second last one in the series, believe it or not. And we've been looking at the B in Baptist, believers' baptism by immersion. The A is the authority of Scripture. P is the priesthood of all believers. T, the lordship of Christ. I, last week, individual soul liberty and responsibility. And today is the S of Baptist, salvation by grace through faith alone. And there's three parts to that. And what I've done is in your outlines, I've put in an outline that I put in a few years back when we were celebrating the 500th anniversary of the Reformation. And in that outline, you'll see that there are 5 solas, which is a Latin word, 5 solas included in that. Sola means alone, the Latin word for alone. And the 5 solas are 5 Latin phrases or slogans that was used to differentiate or to focus on the priorities of the Protestants during the period of the Reformation. And there's 5. We're going to be focusing on 3, but I put all 5 in just so you would have it. The first one we focused on already is sola scriptura, which means Scripture alone. As the Scriptures say, all Scripture is God-breathed and is useful for teaching, rebuking, correcting, and training in righteousness, so that the servant of God may be thoroughly equipped for every good work. It's to do with the inspiration of Scripture, the idea that the Scripture is God's God-breathed word. And the next 3 are what we're going to be focusing on, although even the second one we've looked at it just a couple of weeks ago, which is solus Christus, which is Christ alone. It's the idea that our salvation is found in the person of Jesus Christ and in Him alone. Jesus is absolutely unique. There never has been, never will be anyone like Him. Our salvation is through Him and Him alone. The Scriptures say in Acts chapter 4, salvation is found in no one else, for there is no other name under heaven given to mankind by which we must be saved. He is the only way that we can have a relationship with God. In the book of Revelation, Jesus Himself says, I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end, the first and the last. He is absolutely unique. There is no one like Him. Think about it. Jesus died upon the cross for our salvation. Had there been any other way that you and I could have a relationship with God, do you think that God would have allowed His Son to die? If there had been any plan B, any other path, any other route, is there any way that God would have allowed His Son to die? But it's only because of His death that we can have a relationship with God, that God allowed His Son to die upon the cross for us. Solus Christus. Salvation is through grace, through faith alone. So we've looked at salvation. And the other 2, which are what we're going to be focusing on today, is by grace through faith alone. Those are what people today get hung up on. And it was and is a unique contribution of our Baptist forebears to the Christian faith. Salvation by faith, by grace through faith. Now, what does by grace mean? By grace means that there's nothing that you and I can do to earn our salvation. It's done simply because of God's mercy towards us. And many people today, perhaps some who are here today, we struggle with that. We struggle with it because it sounds too easy. It sounds too simple. It doesn't require anything of us. Let me give you an illustration of this. I'm going to ask Paul Short if he'll come forward for a second. Yeah. Paul's not in a good mood today, by the way. He's a Leafs fan. So he's not in a very good mood today, but he's willing to help us out. I have something for you. I want to give you this. What's going to be happening in next June? So how do you feel that I've given this to you? You feel honored? You're quite thrilled by it, aren't you? Yeah, it's the cool you can skip that part. See, he seems to be a little underwhelmed with his appreciation, doesn't he? Why is that? Why is he not excited about receiving this, as the Leafs will be, as he says, next June when they win the cup? Exactly. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. He was underwhelmed, to say the least, because he didn't do anything to earn it. I was giving him a trophy. If he had done some great accomplishment and we were recognizing that, I'm sure he would have been thrilled. But to give a trophy to someone for nothing is meaningless. And that's sometimes how we feel about salvation. We're told it's free. There's nothing we can do to earn it. It's from God's grace alone. And we think to ourselves, no, I don't want it if it's free. I want to work for it. I want to earn it. I want to deserve it. And that is a hurdle that each one of us has to get over, because there is nothing that we can do to earn our salvation, our relationship with God. It is through grace. Reminds me of a story of a group of young people who went down to a swimming hole. And one of them was out in the middle of the pool, and he was swimming around. He got some cramps, and he started drowning, and he was floundering. And one of the young people was clearly the best swimmer in the group, and so everyone was looking to him. And here's this young man drowning, and his hands are going like this. And this fellow just very slowly takes off his shirt and folds it up and lays it down. And all the other kids are saying, he's drowning, he's drowning, he's drowning. And this young man just says, calm down, calm down. And he watches them for a little while. And then as the young man in the pool begins to lose his strength and stops fluttering around, he jumps in, grabs him, and pulls him out. And they asked him why he waited so long. And he said, well, it's very simple. If I had tried to save him when he was floundering around, he would have pulled us both down. I had to wait until he was exhausted before I could pull him in without putting myself and him in danger. And sometimes that's what God does with us. We are so anxious to try to show God we are worthy, that we are capable, that we can do it on our own, that he has to just wait and stand back until life teaches us some hard lessons that we can't do it on our own. That it's not through our effort until we reach the point where we say, I give up. I can't make myself right in God's sight. I can't do it on my own. I don't have the ability. I can't try anymore. I'm exhausted. And when we do that, God then swims out to us. And he says, finally, This is the point that I've been waiting for you to arrive at. And he pulls us in. Salvation is through Christ alone. It's through grace. And it is by faith alone. Faith means not works. It means that all we do is trust in what Jesus did for us. And again, we struggle with this. Many years ago, a company created an instant cake mix. All you had to do was add water. It was the easiest thing in the world. Make a cake by just adding water. Sales were abysmal. And the company couldn't figure out this was an amazing product. It was the easiest thing. They couldn't understand why the sales were so low. And so they did some interviews with potential customers, and they found out that people were suspicious of it. It seemed too simple. It seemed too easy. And so the company went back and they changed the recipe so that in addition to water, you also had to add a couple of eggs. And as soon as they did that, the sales went way up because it made more sense to people. This, again, we struggle with. It seems too simple. It seems too easy. I don't have to do anything. I don't have to work. I don't have to show myself worthy of it. It's almost as though we want God to change the recipe, to make it a little bit more complicated. He hasn't changed the recipe. It's not through how you live your life, how I live my life, how good we are. As I've often said, we try to live good lives not to get ourselves saved, but because we are saved, because we have a relationship with God. It's not through anything that we do. Think about when Jesus was dying on the cross, and there were thieves on both sides of him, and one of them said to him, what were his words to Jesus? You remember? Remember me when you come in your kingdom. Now, what did that thief have to offer Jesus? His feet were nailed to the cross. He couldn't go anywhere for Jesus. His arms were nailed to the cross. He couldn't do anything for Jesus. The only thing he had to offer was his trust. And what did Jesus say to him in response? The young man said, remember me when you come in your kingdom. And Jesus said in response, say it loud, today you will be with me in paradise. You and I. This is, I could go into church history and show you how radical this was when the Baptists first proposed it. It went against what was then traditional theology, I'll call it. But it was the idea that we can't do anything to make ourselves acceptable to God. We simply offer our lives to Him and trust in Him, in what He did on the cross. Salvation is through Christ alone, by God's grace, and through faith on our part. There's nothing to take pride in. There's nothing to boast about. It's simply a quiet trust in what Jesus Christ did for us on the cross. Salvation by grace through faith alone.